Red light. That is the first thing I remember. Red light flashing across a cracked ceiling, and a voice on the ship speakers counting down the minutes we had left to breathe. My name is Vesic, and I was strapped into a chair on a dying ship called the Ninth Mercy, listening to a machine tell me that the air would run out in 40 minutes. Around me, children were crying, not because they understood the countdown, but because they could feel the fear in the adults holding them. We had been drifting for 209 days. Our home was gone, burned away by an enemy fleet called the Skarn, and every power in the galaxy that we begged for help had given us the same answer: no. Some of them took months to say it, some of them said it in a single line of text, but it was always no. I stopped counting the refusals after the 11th one. I had made peace with dying in that metal shell, floating between stars, forgotten by everyone who had the power to save us. Then the ship speakers changed their tone. Not a countdown this time. A voice, rough and full of static, speaking words our translator was still learning. This is the Corvallis, representing the Terran Expeditionary Fleet. We have your position. We are 11 hours out at maximum burn. Hold on. I did not know what Terran meant. None of us did. We had never heard of this species. They were not part of any council we had petitioned. As far as galactic law was concerned, they barely existed at all. A small species with one home star, taking their first steps into open space. 11 hours felt like a lifetime when our air was measured in minutes, not hours. But something in that voice made the children stop crying. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was simply the sound of someone answering, after 209 days of silence. The ship engineer, a tired old man named Farlow, worked without rest to stretch our air further. He rerouted power from the engines, from the lights, from anything that was not keeping us alive. His hands shook from exhaustion, but he did not stop. I helped him where I could, holding wires steady while he worked, watching the numbers on the display creep upward, buying us extra minutes one wire at a time. Every minute mattered. Every minute was a war fought in silence. 6 hours in, an alarm tore through the ship. Not the air alarm this time. A proximity alarm. Something was approaching from the debris field behind us, and it was moving fast. Farlow checked the sensors and his face went pale. A Skarn patrol ship. They had found us. They had been hunting refugee ships for months, cleaning up what they called loose ends from the war. We were a loose end. The patrol ship was faster than us, and armed, and we had nothing. No weapons, no shields worth mentioning, no way to run. All we had was a countdown to a rescue that was still 5 hours away, and a hunter closing the distance every second. I remember gripping the edge of my seat, watching the sensor display, doing the only math that mattered anymore. Could the patrol ship reach us before our air ran out? Could the Corvallis reach us before the patrol ship did? 2 clocks, both ticking against us, and no way to stop either one. Farlow made a decision that I will never forget. He vented part of our remaining fuel into space behind us, creating a cloud of gas and debris that scattered our engine signature across a wider area. It would not stop the patrol ship, but it might slow them down while they searched for us inside the false readings. It worked, for a while. The patrol ship changed course, sweeping through the debris, and our distance from them grew instead of shrinking. For the first time in hours, I let myself breathe a little easier. That relief did not last. 3 hours before the Corvallis was due to arrive, the patrol ship found our real signature again. This time they did not search. They came straight for us, weapons charging, moving faster than before. Farlow shouted for everyone to brace, and I grabbed the small girl sitting next to me, holding her against my chest as the ship shook from a blast that grazed our outer hull. Sparks fell from a broken panel above us. Somewhere in the ship someone screamed, and then the lights flickered and went dark for a long, terrifying second before the backup power kicked in. We were not going to survive another hit like that. I knew it, and I think everyone on that ship knew it too. Then a new voice came through the speakers, calm and steady, cutting through the chaos. "This is Commander Alice Brennan of the Corvallis. We see you. We see the ship on your tail. Hold your course. Help is closer than you think." I did not understand how that could be true. The Corvallis was supposed to be hours away, but moments later, a streak of light crossed our view screen, and a second ship dropped out of some kind of high-speed jump right between us and the patrol ship. It was smaller than I expected. Not a warship built for battle, but a converted vessel with scars across its hull, patched in places with metal that did not match the rest of the frame. It looked like it had been built by people who cared more about getting somewhere than looking impressive while doing it. The patrol ship fired on it immediately. The Corvallis shook under the impact, alarms blaring loud enough that I could hear them through our own ship speakers, carried over the open channel, but it held its position, blocking the path between the hunter and us. Commander Brennan's voice came through again, tighter now, but still steady. All hands, hold the line. We are not losing these people today. I watched through the cracked viewport as the Corvallis returned fire, not with the precision of a warship, but with the stubborn persistence of a crew who refused to move. Every strike that landed on their hull was a strike that did not land on ours. They were taking the damage meant for us, on purpose, without hesitation. The battle lasted 11 minutes. It felt like 11 years. I watched pieces of the Corvallis hull break away and drift into space. Watched their return fire grow less accurate as their systems took damage, and still they did not retreat. Still they held their position between the patrol ship and the Ninth Mercy. Then, finally, the patrol ship's engines flared and it turned away, retreating into the debris field it had come from, unwilling to risk further damage for a target that was costing them too much. Silence followed, a different kind of silence than before, not the silence of waiting for death, but the silence of realizing you had survived something you were sure would kill you. 3 shuttles detached from the battered Corvallis and made their way toward us. I watched them cut through the space between our ships with a kind of desperate speed, as if every second still mattered, even with the danger gone. When the first shuttle docked and the airlock cycled open, a woman in a patched environment suit stepped through. She pulled off her helmet, revealing tired eyes and a face streaked with sweat, and looked around at 400,000 strangers crammed into a dying ship. Her name, I would learn later, was Alice Brennan, the same commander whose voice had come through the speakers during the fight. She did not ask about our resources. She did not ask what we could offer in exchange for help. She looked at the children still clinging to their parents and said one simple thing: "We don't have room, so we're going to make room." I found out later just how true that statement was. Earth itself was still recovering from a war of its own, a war that had ended only a generation before. They had shortages. They had families of their own still rebuilding what they had lost. Nobody had voted to send the Corvallis into a fight it was not built for, to rescue a species most of their own government had never heard of. Commander Brennan had made that call herself, and her crew had followed her into danger without a single objection. The next hours were a blur of movement. Human crew members, most of them younger than I expected, worked alongside Farlow and the other engineers, transferring air, water, and medicine from their own limited supplies onto our ship. They gave up rations meant for their own people without being asked twice. A young medic named Daniel Hughes knelt beside an injured Cathar elder, studying our biology through a hurried translation device, piecing together enough information to treat wounds his training had never prepared him for. He worked with steady hands, asking simple questions through broken translations, learning as he went, refusing to let unfamiliarity stop him from helping. I asked him once, while he wrapped a bandage around a child's arm, why his people had come so far for strangers they had never met. He looked up at me, surprised by the question, as if the answer was obvious. "Because nobody else was going to," he said, "and somebody had to." It was such a simple answer, but it carried the weight of everything that had happened over the last 209 days. Every council that had debated and delayed, every power that had cited rules and quotas and diplomatic complications, every polite refusal dressed up in careful language, none of it mattered anymore, because one small, struggling species had decided that rules and complications were not good enough reasons to let people die. Word of what happened to us spread faster than anyone expected, not through official channels, because Earth had none that other powers respected yet, but through the desperate whisper network that refugees everywhere rely on. Other stranded ships heard our story before we even finished repairs. The Vashtu colonies, drifting after their star turned unstable, war orphans from 3 different species abandoned once they stopped being useful in the fighting. All of them had been turned away by powers far stronger than Earth. All of them started sending their own distress calls toward a single, unlikely destination. Humanity kept answering. I remember the day we finally reached a small, half-built colony called New Meridian, a rocky world that Earth had claimed only a few years earlier and had barely begun to settle themselves. It was not full of shining towers or advanced technology. It was full of half-finished buildings, temporary shelters, and construction equipment still working around the clock. But it had breathable air, open ground, and people willing to share both. Commander Brennan walked me through the settlement herself, pointing out where new housing would go, where the water systems were being expanded to support more people than the colony had ever planned for. She explained it all with the same steady calm she had shown during the fight, as if building a home for 400,000 strangers was simply the next task on her list. I asked her the same question I had asked Daniel. Why? Why risk everything for people you had never met, people who could offer nothing in return? She thought about it for a long moment before answering. "Every species we've met so far has a good reason to say no," she said. Not enough resources, not enough room, not our problem. We figured somebody should try being the exception. That answer stayed with me long after she walked away to deal with the next crisis. And there was always a next crisis. A water system that needed repair. A dispute between settlers that needed calming. A shipment of supplies that had not arrived on time. She handled each one with the same tired patience, never once complaining about the weight she carried. Over the following months, more ships arrived. Some came from species I had never heard of, fleeing dangers I could barely understand. Each time, the humans of New Meridian found a way to stretch their resources a little further, to build a little more housing, to welcome a few thousand more people who had nowhere else to go. I watched a woman named Grace Bennett organize teams of settlers and refugees together, teaching everyone from every species the basics of construction, so that the work of building homes did not fall only on human shoulders. She had no patience for anyone who tried to separate themselves by species, insisting that everyone on New Meridian worked and ate and lived as neighbors, not as strangers sharing space. I watched a farmer named Peter Coleman, who had lost half his own crop to a storm that same season, still find room to teach Cathar families how to grow food in soil that was different from anything we had known before. He never once mentioned his own losses while he did it. Slowly, the fear that had followed us for 209 days began to fade. Not completely, because fear like that does not disappear overnight, but enough that children began to laugh again without flinching at loud sounds. Enough that people began to build lives instead of simply surviving each day. I think about Farlow often, the tired engineer who kept our air flowing and our fuel burning long enough for help to arrive. He settled on New Meridian too, spending his days teaching young humans and Cathar alike how ship systems worked, passing on skills he had spent a lifetime learning. He told me once that after decades of keeping old ships running against impossible odds, it was strange and wonderful to finally build something meant to last, instead of something meant only to survive one more day. The galaxy's great powers still do not fully understand what happened during those months. The councils still cite their rules and their quotas. The diplomats still speak in careful, measured language about resource allocation and long-term stability. They do not see New Meridian as anything more than a minor colony belonging to a minor species. They do not understand that while they were debating, a small crew on a battered ship called the Corvallis decided that debating was a luxury other people's lives could not afford. They do not understand that every refusal they handed out, every careful no wrapped in polite language, eventually found its way to a species too young and too recently broken itself to know that saying no was even an option. I sit now on New Meridian, in a home built from salvage and stubborn hope, watching human children and Cathar children run together through streets that did not exist a few years ago. I watch Daniel Hughes, no longer a young medic overwhelmed by unfamiliar biology, now training others in the medical center he helped build from nothing. I watch Alice Brennan, still working, still solving one problem after another, never resting long enough to accept the thanks that so many of us try to give her. I used to believe that we survived because of luck. I have come to understand that we survived because every door that should have opened for us stayed shut, refusal after refusal, until we found the one people who understood, better than anyone else in the galaxy, exactly what it cost to be left standing outside a closed door. They had been refused help themselves once, in their own history, when they needed it most, and rather than let that lesson fade, they carried it with them into the stars, deciding that the next time someone stood outside a locked door in the cold and the dark, they would be the ones who opened it. That is the story of how a species with barely enough resources for itself became a home for the ones the entire galaxy had rejected, not because they were the strongest, not because they had the most to offer, but because they were the only ones willing to answer when every other voice in the galaxy had already said no. And if you ask anyone on New Meridian today what they remember most about those 209 days of silence, they will not tell you about the fear, or the countdown, or the ship that hunted us through the dark. They will tell you about a voice crackling through a broken speaker, calm and certain, saying words that changed everything. We see you. Hold your course. Help is closer than you think.